Hey everybody, welcome back to Series 2 of The Art of Change, going into evolutionary leadership. My name is Tony Stark Fernandes, the Change Catalyst, and today with me I have Kevin Bost back again to talk about how do we put empathy in action by using principles and put it into practice and use those core values into our everyday organizations by leading through the heart. Kevin, can you give us a quick introduction about who you are and your background?
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Kevin. I have a background in organizational leadership. That's what my bachelor's is in from Colorado State University. Master's is underway in organizational psychology and a PhD later come in psychology. Started in law enforcement as a line level. I've risen up through multiple ranks and currently sit as a division chief of one of our major divisions.
For criminal investigations, right?
Criminal investigations.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what we talked about let's do a recap. So in episode 1, we talked about empathy with leadership. We talked about innovation, collaboration, partnering, all these different things that really, in the beginning, most people say, oh, that makes sense. But when you think about these companies and the organizations, oftentimes they live in a bubble. They stay in this, hey, we're the expert of this, and we have to crush the competition, and we can't collaborate with others because they're the competition. But the reality is, sometimes you can come with these new ideas and build. And so, for example, Microsoft, pioneer of personal computers, right? Setting the standard right there with Apple. In fact, just overpowering Apple for many years, right? And still does. And when you look at what they did, it was great. However, they were getting stale. They were following the same business plans and the same things they were doing before. And they were still a successful company, but they weren't innovating. They weren't coming up with new ideas. And you fast forward to Satya Nadella, as we talked about in the previous episode, and how he just completely changed the way Microsoft does business, focusing on their people, innovating, collaborating, and then working our way forward by empowering those individuals to do more in their organization. I think that's really important. So the first thing I want to bring up is why is empathy so crucial for as a skill for leaders compared to just simply crunching the numbers?
Empathy allows you to understand your people. Focusing on numbers is just looking at data. Focusing on your people requires empathy. Understanding those feelings, like what's driving them, but also understanding their hindrances, whether it's personal or professional. Empathy, I think, is vital to providing for your employee so that they understand they're not a number, but they're a person within an organization.
Yeah. So one of the things that as you're talking about this, it kind of spurred me, when I think of these companies that do these climate surveys, right? I want to get a feel for the climate in my organization, right? And sure, I'm sure there's a few people that are honest on those things, but the reality comes down to most are not going to tell the CEO what's directly going on, right? But as managers, it's up to us and leaders, it's up to us to empower that lower echelon. And I just, like one of my buddies I talked with today, we talked about, I really want to reach the first line supervisors because they create the environment for those worker bees to thrive. And I need to make sure that first line supervisor has that ability to connect with those members, to allow them to be able to come to them and say, hey boss, I'm struggling today. Here's what's going on, right? And we need to be able to adapt to that. Now, there's some people that might be not so great as employees. And so, you got to watch that fine line. But at the end of the day, most of us are really trying to do our best. And we don't want people to come to work in fear or just dreading being there, right? And so one crucial thing, which sounds like it wouldn't do anything, which is having a boss with empathy, right? If I come in and more than just a good morning, right? I don't necessarily need just a good morning, right? Let's have that conversation where it's not just a verbal thing. It's also the energy we all bring into that work center, right?
Totally. I think you shared a really important part, Tony. Try walking in, say, your next day of work, and instead of just saying, "Hey, Tony, how's your day?" Because we know they're gonna respond, "Good," or "How was yesterday?" "Good," because that's what we kind of open with a closed question.
Living the dream.
But what if you get to know your employees well enough that you could ask more of a specific question?
Absolutely.
Like if somebody says, "Hey, Kevin, like, how are your kids doing? How's Haley? How's Jordan? How's Peyton?" And now it's more personable to relatable. That establishes a connection and shows the empathy from the supervisor or the leader down to truly caring about their person.
Yeah, 100%. When you think about, so let's say we're getting ready for the weekend, right? So some leaders might think, well, I don't want to pry into my people's personal lives, right? And that's totally understandable. But
absolutely,
as you allow people to be open with you, sometimes, they may just out the breeze walking by your, office. Hey boss, hope you're having a good, there's the thumbs up again. Hey boss, having a good day. Hey, Joe, what are you doing this weekend? Got a birthday party taking the kids to, and then that Monday walks in. Hey, how was that birthday party? Just that little attention to detail of that conversation you had Friday with that member, and they go, oh yeah, it was great. Thanks for asking. Blah, blah. That will play so much more into the well-being of that individual, because they go, man, this not only does they listen, active listening, but they cared about how my weekend went. Not just how was your weekend? Great. Sounds good. It's more deeper, as you mentioned. And I think that's so crucial. And all that takes is just that little bit of engagement, that little bit of active listening, and then incorporating that into your everyday dialogue, right?
Yeah, you just said go deeper. And how do you dig a hole? You dig a hole one scoop at a time.
Right.
You don't go 6 feet deep. You go inches. Oh, I just hurt hit a foot. Now I hit a yard. And now, I've hit the length of a basketball player. But it's that trust, it's that communication, and that safe place that I'm going to give you a little more. I'm going to tell the boss a little more. And then as that relationship kind of evolves, it's like, oh, hey, I think the boss might genuinely care. I might actually give up my kid's name to you next time. Like, yep. Jordan had a soccer game, or Jordan had a football game. And suddenly, as the boss, you're like, there's an established relationship that's kind of going deeper. But you don't go from 0 to 6 feet 99.9% of the time, probably.
Right.
You got to take it, it's an inch, it's a foot, it's a yard at a time.
Yeah. And let's get to the first technique. Let's talk about active listening.
Yeah.
Right. So let's do me a favor as we go through this. What are some ways that you think people can chime into that active listening perspective when they're working with individuals? What are some things to think about right now that people can incorporate today to really enhance their ability to be an active listener?
Active listening is simple to remember. I think there's a reason we probably have 2 ears, 1 mouth, is it requires us to hear. Listening to an individual share something with you requires you to process that information, not already start working on a response, but hear what they're sharing with you, and then kind of regurgitate that to them. That allows, it's kind of like a checks and balances. If you shared, let's say, Tony, how was your day today? And you say, oh, my day was terrible. And I say, cool, what are you doing this weekend? I haven't listened. But I said, whoa, did you say you had a terrible day? What's going on? So, do you want to share a little bit about that? I've heard you say something's not right, even though you didn't say it's not right, but you said, I'm having a bad day, so something's off. That tells me if I'm listening and hearing you, and I'm going to repeat it back to see if we can engage in conversation maybe further about that.
Yeah. One of the things I love what you just mentioned was, their response back, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to demonstrate you're paying attention to somebody, restate what you heard.
Absolutely.
Some people look at it as the parrot complex. I don't see it that way. I see it, if you and I are having a conversation and you provide some information, I want to make sure I understood you, right? Maybe maybe you said something that, didn't come out right and you didn't realize it, or just acknowledging, you said something and I come back and I say, oh, so if I heard you correctly, this is what blah, blah, blah. And you go right into that, and people then feel heard. And 9 times out of 10, people just want to feel heard. Doesn't mean you have to come with a solution. Like, one of the things that I think is always interesting to talk about men versus women, right? Men always want to fix things, right? And you hear a problem, we want to solve it, but sometimes we just need to listen, right?
Yes.
So sometimes just listen to your people, and if they're letting it out, and you say, well, is there anything I can do for you to help you today? Like, is there anything, do you want to take a quick break, and just take a walk around the building? Whatever it might be, right? They may go, no, but I appreciate you letting me vent that out. I really just need to get it out, right? That could be the biggest difference to an individual. And all because you chose to not only allow them the safe space to give that information freely, but then you also showed you were actively willing to listen and hear them, and you cared about their well-being to offer them some kind of, method of de-stressing from whatever the scenario would be. And so what people fail to understand is when you're, active listening, it's not just about coming up with solutions, but it's just in creating that safe space. The minute I have that safe space, my tension goes down.
Yeah.
Right?
It's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So important.
Now, so when you think about conflict with empathy, how do you handle conflict when dealing with empathy?
Yeah. That requires validation. And when there's conflicts, back to active listening and hearing it, you can't solve a conflict until you understand what that root cause is. You can't find that root cause unless you hear out the whole arguments the oral arguments that come from, maybe let's say it's two employees, let's say it's an employee and a boss, or let's say it's not even an employee and a boss, but maybe it's a program or it's a decision the boss has made. Now it's created conflict. And I have to hear that individual out. I will regurgitate that information back. I will share back, hey, this is what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct? But I can validate that. It's okay to validate conflict, even if it's not the end result that they want to get. It's okay for me to say, Tony, I understand you're frustrated and I understand where you're coming from. And that's okay to be frustrated. I would like to provide a little information as to why this decision was made. I've listened to the conflict, right? I've truly heard whatever may be driving that, but I've got to validate it. A lot of times when we have that conflict, we just want to be validated. I'm mad at this. And as a leader, it's okay to say, I understand why you're mad. I get that. And and sometimes be like, okay, and regurgitate, listen to it, and then explain it. And a lot of times through active listening comes the why. That's what we want to know because we're humans. We want to know why, right? If you have kids, well, why? When you tell a kid no, what do we all say? We're all kids, right? Why? Why, mom? Why, dad? Why? But you can validate that and say, this is the reason why. But that you can't do that without demonstrating a proficiency in active listening.
Right. And I think what's key when you think about often when we hit conflict, right? Mm-hmm. There's two parties that aren't on an agreement on the same page, right? The same sheet of music. Mm-hmm. And sometimes one might feel like they're being challenged, right? Yeah. And so it creates this conflict and it can be an internal, external, whatever it might be. But that conflict comes out because people they're getting heated or there's some, underlying condition that's causing them to get flustered, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes all it takes is maybe an unbiased party to step in. Maybe you're the leader. You have two employees that are having a conflict and you step in and go, okay, let's talk about this. And rather, I've seen a lot of leaders who they'll pull them one at a time, right? Hey, let me hear your side. Let me pull this guy. Let me hear your side. Oh. Why not do that in the same room together?
Right.
You're essentially a mediator, but sometimes it's important to let both people say it out loud to the same room, but have them say it to you, right? They're not saying it to each other because there's the conflict. They're saying it to you and you can help mediate. Now it's important. I want to point this out because it sounds very therapeutic, right? Like, oh, I'm being a therapist. No, but what you're trying to do is find a solution, find a way to get them to the common ground.
Yeah.
And the reality is you're trying to de-escalate that conflict. Because what happens if you don't intervene? Then you have two employees who are at throat to each other. What happens to that environment? What happens to the safe space that we were trying to create in the first place when we have these two individuals who are conflicted?
A Jenga game.
It's a Jenga game, and it's going to collapse. It's going to go into collapse, right? So how do we empower that? So from your perspective, do you have any examples where you've seen a conflict like that, where you saw kind of a success story of how somebody was able to actually de-escalate that?
So I can share an example I had just recently on a reorganization that we were doing within even our own division.
Ooh, reorganizations are tough.
And that always spurs conflict. Anytime you reorg anything, conflict's gonna come. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
But it's important to establish a set of rules when working through a conflict. You have both parties, kind of like what you shared about, where you can, and in this case, I had them both in the room. I got to hear both sides. But we got to establish before we, oral arguments, if you would, talk to me, this is the ground foundation that we're going to kind of play by the rules, if you will. Like you said, it's not really therapeutic, but we're not going to cut each other down. We're going to listen to the other person, or I'm going to listen. And then we're going to work towards a common goal. And ultimately, a decision is going to be made. And even if it's not, say, in person A's favor, it's more in person B's favor, but everybody got to express their desires, got to express their conflict, and we got to resolve that conflict. And actually, in this particular case, it was a solution that I actually think all three of us walked away thinking, hey, that worked out well. That worked out well. I was heard, I was validated, and the outcome was better than I anticipated.
Absolutely. That's a great example. I appreciate you sharing that. When we look at, for example, how you see empathy improve leadership effectiveness, right? I look at an example as you're the chief right now, right? Mm-hmm. So you're at that highest echelon. Mm-hmm. How do you see your middle level, what do they call it? Supervisors and
commanders, and yeah.
How do you see the differences between your commanders and how they lead, and where you see the empathy? how do you see that shine through, or how do you see, and really how does your role play into developing those individuals from that position? Since you've worked your way up,
Right.
I'm kind of curious on how you break that down.
Yeah, so I see each rank, whether it's a sworn, so whether it's a police officer's rank, or law enforcement has just about 50% civilian as well. And so I have civilian directors that report to me, and below them are what we call supervisors or sergeants. So that's kind of how that rank system would go. But I have to foster an environment with my commanders that they feel safe to be able to come to me, that I listen to them, that I take into account their conflict, and that I'm truly geared towards resolving that in an ethical and a good way.
I want to stop you here because this is really important. You just talked about creating a safe space for managers. So it's important. I want to hit this here.
Yep.
We started talking about the lowest level, right? But the reality is at each level of leadership, we're creating that safe space for the next echelon below so they can do it for the next level below, and so on. Yeah. And so what I love that you talked about here is, on top of the fact that you're promoting, hey guys, we want to do this, lead with empathy, lead with action, but you're also leading by example by doing it for them as well. So keep going, but I want to really highlight that.
And that's what's vital, because at the end of the day, how can I, my division has give or take 100 people or maybe more. How can I ensure that my lowest level, line level employee, who, let's point out, is potentially the future of our organization, how do I ensure that they are getting what my personal vision and belief is? I have to instill that with my next echelon down, which is my commanders, which is my civilian directors, and I foster that environment, and I empower them, because then what are they going to go do? Hey, they're going to go to their supervisors, their managers, their sergeants that are below them that report to them, because they know, hey, this is the environment that Kevin is really striving to create. And that's gonna, kind of resonate down and down. It's like a stream. Think of it, you see those flash floods in like Arizona. That water just trickles right down. And I got to have an employee recently come in and express that they actually enjoy coming to work. And this is somebody who wasn't like, I love work. It was like, this is an individual that, I was kind of, paying attention, like, how do I empower that person? How do I impact that person as the chief? Well, in order to do that, I get impact here, and I get allow impact down to here, and an impact down to here. And you want it to be contagious. Like, let's be contagious,
right? And in a world where negativity spreads far more than positivity, right? You really got to emphasize into that positive message and not allow that cancerous negativity to infect the organization. And I think that's really, really great that you highlight that. One last question before we get to the end of the episode. I want to talk about when you have empathetic leadership, how have you seen that attribute to your organizational success? And how can it help others with organizational success?
Right. So back to being contagious, right? When you foster and you empower and you create an environment that is safe, that your voice actually means something, that you're not a statistic, but you're a person, that creates a drive down. I always share in our organization that the most important people, even me as a chief, I think people go up the level and they're like, I'm so important, but really you're not. The further you go up, the less important you become.
Right.
Because it's about the line, and it's about that first line supervisor. And when you create that environment and you show that you care about them, they want to come to work. They want to do good things. And that's where organizations move. When people show up because they want to be there and they want to go have an impact and they want to go hit, a sales mark, or they want to accomplish a goal, or they want to create something, they've got the buy-in. And the buy-in from the line and your first line will drive your organization until tomorrow and the day to come.
Right. And so one of the things I want to leave our audience with, because a lot of people get focused on stats and data, and I usually start with these in the beginning, but really companies with high empathetic leadership outperform their competitors by 20%. 20% just by incorporating empathetic leadership. And that's so amazing when you think about how many are not using that. That's going to put you at an advantage. And really, when you look at the 2016 Empathy Index, the top 10 most empathetic companies generated 50% more earnings compared to the bottom 10. So when you think about, using these techniques support and help my organization, my company grow, those long-term data points will show. And we
Yeah.
just have to be able to incorporate and bring these teachings in. So I want to say thank you again, Kevin, for joining us episode 2. Everybody, thanks again for joining in with us. Episode 3, stay tuned for next week. We're going to be talking about how you can care for your team. And so we talked about the one-on-one condition. We need to start talking about also the strategies for the team as a whole, while also taking care of the individual's needs as well. And so those kind of go hand in hand. We'll go right into those techniques and those personal connections. So stay tuned for next week. Subscribe, share the videos, and let's help get this word out there on how to lead with action.